Today, we're jumping way back in time to ancient India to unpack an incredible story of conquest, strategy, and power. This is the story of the rise of Magadha, the one kingdom that managed to outplay and outfight all its rivals to create India's very first empire.
So just try to picture this. A map crowded with 16 different powerful kingdoms, all constantly fighting for control. It's basically a geopolitical free-for-all. And yet, out of all that chaos, one kingdom, Magadha, comes out on top and conquers every single one of them. The big question is, how on earth did they do it? What was their secret?
To figure this out, we're going to break it all down. First, we'll get the lay of the land and see who the key players were. Then, we'll dive into a massive technological revolution that changed everything. After that, we'll pinpoint Magadha's unique advantages, meet the incredibly ruthless leaders who drove their expansion, and finally, see how they built an empire that left a lasting legacy.
All right, first up, let's set the scene. You really have to imagine this period as a kind of ancient Indian Game of Thrones. It was a violent, competitive world dominated by what were known as the 16 Mahajanapadas, or Great Kingdoms. And just look at all the players on the board here. You had kingdoms all over the place, from Kasi and Kosala in the heartland to Gandhara way out in the northwest. Every single one of these was a serious power player, which meant the competition was absolutely brutal, and nobody's survival was guaranteed. What's really interesting is that these kingdoms weren't all run the same way. There were two totally different systems. On one side, you had your classic absolute monarchies, like Magadha, where one king called all the shots. But on the other, you had these oligarchic republics, the Gana-Sanghas, which were run by a council of clan leaders. And trust me, this difference in how they were governed is going to be a huge deal in the wars to come. So, with all these kingdoms in a deadlock, what breaks the stalemate? What changes everything? Well, the answer, in a word, is technology. A massive Iron Age revolution was sweeping across the subcontinent, and it was about to change the rules of the game forever. It was all part of a chain reaction. See, you get these new iron tools, right? Iron axes can suddenly clear the super dense forests, and heavy iron plows can dig into the hard soil. This leads to a massive boom in food production, especially wet rice. And if you're a ruler, what does more food mean? It means you can support a bigger population, collect more taxes, and fund huge cities, and, most critically, large professional armies. But this wasn't just about economics and war. It was a huge cultural shift, too. All this new wealth, part of what's called India's Second Urbanization, created a powerful new merchant class. And these folks started to support brand new ways of thinking, like Buddhism and Jainism, which directly challenged the old, rigid social structures. Okay, so the Iron Age created the potential for someone to build an empire. But the big question remains, why Magadha? Out of all 16 kingdoms, why were they the ones to pull it off? Well, it turns out they had a secret recipe for success. Magadha's rise to the top was no fluke. It was built on what you could almost call 4 unfair advantages. They had the perfect location, a monopoly on essential resources, unbelievably strong capital cities, and a string of absolutely brilliant and brutal leaders. First, let's talk geography. Location, location, location. Magadha was sitting on prime real estate, right in the heart of the fertile Ganga Valley. The soil was rich, the rains were heavy, and that meant they could grow way more food than anybody else. That agricultural surplus was the engine that powered their entire empire. Second advantage, resources. Magadha was sitting on a gold mine, or, well, an iron mine, to be exact. They controlled the huge iron ore deposits nearby. So while all their rivals were scrambling to find good quality iron, Magadha could just crank out superior weapons and farming tools. It gave them a massive edge on the battlefield and in the fields. And third, they had incredible defenses. Their capital, Pataliputra, was a strategic masterpiece. The technical term for it is a Jaladurga, a water fort. Built where major rivers met, it was surrounded by water, making it nearly impossible to attack. Plus, it gave them total control over all the river trade and troop movements. They were basically untouchable. But you know, a great location and plenty of resources only get you so far. You need the right people in charge to make it all count. So let's talk about the ambitious leaders and the wild new military tech they used to build their empire. It all started with the Haryanka dynasty. You had Bimbisara, who got the ball rolling with a clever mix of political marriages and straight-up conquest. His son, Ajatashatru, was way more aggressive. He took the throne and then fought a vicious 16-year-long war to crush his rivals. And after him, Udayan made the genius call to move the capital to that unbeatable river fort, Pataliputra. And here's the thing about Ajatashatru. He didn't just win with brute force. He won with better tech. He rolled out these brand new, absolutely terrifying weapons of war. We're talking about the Mahashilakantaka, which is basically a giant catapult for hurling huge rocks, and the Rathamusala, an armored chariot with spinning blades on its sides. I mean, this was some next-level horrifying stuff for the ancient world. So the Haryankas laid the foundation, but it was the next dynasty, the Nandas, who took everything to a whole new level, transforming Magadha from just the strongest kingdom into a true sprawling empire. The main architect of this empire was a man named Mahapadmananda. This guy came from a humble background, seized the throne, and then just systematically eliminated all the old noble warrior families. He even earned the terrifying nickname Sarva Kshatrantaka, which means the destroyer of all warrior clans. That tells you everything you need to know about his methods. The Nanda military was an absolute juggernaut, and its signature weapon was the war elephant. They had up to 6,000 of them. These weren't just animals. They were living, breathing tanks that could just plow through enemy lines and smash down fortress walls like they were nothing. And the reputation of this army was so insane, so legendary, that it literally stopped Alexander the Great in his tracks. When he got to India, his soldiers who had conquered most of the known world heard stories about the Nanda army with its 200,000 troops and thousands of war elephants, and they just mutinied. They said, nope, we're done. We are not fighting that. So there you have it. Magadha won the great Game of Thrones of ancient India. But what's the big takeaway here? Why does this story from thousands of years ago still matter? Well, because what Magadha created was basically the blueprint, the step-by-step guide for building an empire. You see this formula repeated throughout history. Control the food and the key resources. Use your geography for defense and trade. Innovate faster than your enemies. Put a determined leader in charge. And when it's time to fight, use overwhelming force. It's a timeless, if brutal, recipe for power. And that really leaves us with this final thought. The story of Magadha is about so much more than ancient India. It's a perfect case study of how geography gives you the opportunity, technology gives you the tools, but ultimately it's that relentless human ambition that actually forges an empire. It's a pattern you see again and again and again throughout history. If you thought this was interesting and you want to go even deeper into how this amazing empire was built, you should definitely check out the source document we used for this explainer. And if you want to test what you've learned, we've got a quiz for you too. You'll find the links for both of them down in the description. Thanks for watching.